All right, everybody. It says I'm live, so please let me know if you can hear me and you can see me. Obviously, we have a lot to talk about tonight, and the main meat and potatoes of this video is going to be about the fact that everything shortage, which we've been dealing with for more than 2 years now, is actually getting worse. It's not necessarily improving. So this will give us some ideas about what we should prepare for, what kind of items to keep an eye out for, and just what to expect in the sense of overall supply chain issues moving forward. I see 5x5 coming through on the chat, so that's much appreciated. Gemini X Gemini, or Gen X Gemini, sorry. Thank you so much. Kevin Ramsey, Harbor Prepper, Durgan is here, Grisio Nemo as well. Dave Sickles, good to see you. Benjamin Jams, 556x45. So we're almost there. We're almost 762x51. So yeah, I had to throw that out there. A little dig, no big deal. Okay, so Liberty Off-Road says, just bought some more food storage today. Got to be prepared. And that is correct. And one thing that's great about prepping and one thing that's great about storing food is that you'll never not need food throughout your lifetime. So unless we get to the point of being plugged into the matrix where we end up living in slime goo and just having that kind of like shoved down our throats via tubes. But other than that, you will need food for the rest of your life. So even if nothing ever happens, which is generally the top comment in most of my videos, nothing's going to happen. That food's not going to hurt you to have. So even if nothing is going to happen, in your opinion, having food is still a good idea. So you can't go wrong with that. The Prepping Mantis, hello to you as well. And you also say hello to everyone in the chat. So I appreciate that. Now, let's go. Philly Flash 77 won a new gun. I'm just going to go ahead and say the word gun. You're good to go here. Don't worry. I don't know why I winked. My wife says it's creepy. But that being said, let's go ahead and get started on what we're talking about tonight, which is just a lot of stuff. You know, there's a lot of things happening. And we should all just be aware that these shortages aren't new, yet they continue. And this is what the theme of tonight's video is going to kind of be, or live stream. Like it's a video, it's a live, it's whatever you want it to be. But you'll see the theme tonight is all of this has been happening for a long time now. And it's being reported on as if it's new news, which I find to be very interesting. So let's just go ahead and bust right into it. Now, one of the things that we're all very aware of is the fact that there is this looming possibility of a railway strike, right? So threat of national rail strike eases for now as key union BMWED extends deal deadline. So basically they're supposed to be able to have everything figured out to go on strike by the 20th, but they've moved that deadline to December 4th for the cooling off period. So yes, that doesn't necessarily mean that we've avoided the strike. It just means that we have avoided it for now. Of course, if the railroad workers go on strike, a lot of the country's supply chain is suddenly extremely disrupted. And I'm talking about 30%, I believe, is how much of our freight is moved by train, possibly even more. But I believe that's just what I read within this article. So that being said, sometime in December, it's very possible that this strike that could have easily occurred back in September could still happen. So I wanted everyone to be aware of that because it's not something that it would be beneficial to any of us. Yet these are things that happen, especially when large sections of our infrastructure are unionized. It's just part of the deal. So keep an eye out on this. This is not necessarily happening for sure. I'm just letting you know that just because things get delayed doesn't mean that they've been solved. And this has not been solved. It has been delayed until December. So we have a few weeks to kind of consider this possibility and understand that if the trains stop moving, a huge amount of products around the entire country also stop moving. So you would then expect huge price increases for just about everything you can possibly think of. Okay, so don't underestimate how important trains are to our infrastructure, which is very interesting because if you consider it, trains are, you know, at least considered to be relatively archaic compared to things like, you know, trucks and cargo planes and cargo ships and everything else. But I mean, back in the 1500s, people were just running around with giant ships going around doing spice trades, and that was no big deal back then. So I guess at the end of the day, if it works, it works, right? So keep all of that in mind. Now, let's go ahead and bust right into the next part of the ongoing shortages, which is seeming to become more and more of an issue, and that's the diesel shortage. Now, the diesel shortage itself has a lot of different facets to it as to why it's occurring and what's causing it and all the things surrounding it is something we could go into just in a video on its own. However, what we do need to focus on is the fact that it will impact the average person, not necessarily the reasons behind the shortage. Diesel supply shortage triggers rise in heating costs, okay? So understand that people are going to have to pay out the wazoo just to keep their utilities up and running through the winter months, which are generally the more expensive months in order to maintain utilities. You either have winter costing you a lot of heat, or you have summer costing you a lot of cooling. But in winter, not only do you have the heat and the fuel and everything else related to keep everything warm, but you also still have the rising costs in other forms of fuel as well, which can then trickle down to your transportation costs and everything else. So colder temperatures not only mean putting on extra layers of clothing, keeping warm can also mean turning up the heat in your home, which can lead to higher heating bills. And this whole article is just about the idea that regardless of the diesel shortage causes and regardless of where it came from, we are finding ourselves in a situation where people are going to literally not be able to afford to stay warm inside of their own homes. We've grown accustomed to a certain comfortable lifestyle here in the United States. And because of being so comfortable with it, nobody really considers the idea that they might have gas running to their home, but they might not be able to afford that gas, right? Or they might not be able to afford all of the trickle-down costs of this diesel shortage that eventually ends up in their thermostat. And because of that, a lot of people are unprepared to actually be cold inside of their dwelling. So this is just something we have to consider and keep in mind. But these shortages affect us directly as Americans. It's not just about keeping an eye on them in the sense of like, oh, this is the building blocks of an SHTF scenario. I mean, there could be some truth to that. But at the end of the day, what we have to really watch out for is how is this going to affect me in a proximal amount of time? Not just, off in the future, but like within the next week or two or a month or two, will this immediately affect me? And these are things that will likely immediately affect you, okay? Growing with Hudson, good to see you. Glad you're here. Michigan Lifestyle is here. Good to see you as well. James Moore, too. Cheese. You can't go wrong with cheese. Okay, so all right, now, why are these shortages happening? I think you all know why all this is happening, but we're still dealing with the consequences of the crisis, right? So understand that a lot of these things had the same exact style of headlines, the same exact style of presentation 2 years ago as they do right now. And yet people are still absorbing this information with a perspective of surprise, right? Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that we're not able to have all these things that we usually have. Even though 2 years ago it was mainstream media news that, these things were out of stock and out of supply. But here we are, everybody's sharing it once again. So let's go into it. Okay. Price spike in turkeys amid shortage in New Mexico. And yes, I do source local news sometimes from different regions in order to kind of get more of an on-the-ground style of reporting. And this comes from New Mexico, of all places. But reports are also made by the U.S. Department of Agriculture about avian influenza found in non-poultry this year, a virus infection that spreads among birds. So understand there's a lot of different things going into this turkey shortage. But at the end of the day, our poultry industry has been largely affected by different avian flu outbreaks over the last couple of years. We've had multiple cullings where large amounts of birds had to be sacrificed in order to stop the spread of these viruses. So we're having a lot of issues when it comes to that industry, okay? Now, understand, here's what I really wanted you to pull out of this particular article. All right, now this is in regards to a grocery store, okay? We ordered the same amount of turkeys this year as we did last year, and our purchase is 33% more the cost. So that is a lot of money, he said. That's real money. It's real quantifiable, tangible dollars on an increase. So understand that they bought the same amount of turkeys they did the year before, but the price has gone up 33% compared to what they bought last year. So we're talking year over year, at least when it comes to poultry, especially turkeys, a 33% price increase. So not only will this shortage be due to the fact that we have all these issues going on with the poultry industry, but the shortage is also due to the fact that the grocers and the distributors that actually get these turkeys to a location that can then distribute it to the public can't afford to order the same amount or can't afford to distribute the same amount of turkeys as they used to. With a 33% increase in cost, they have to either pass that down directly to their third-party sellers, or they have to just order less in order to avoid the higher risk of taking on that large of a debt. Because let's be honest, most of these companies operate on net 30 terms when it comes to credit, and they don't want to spend any more money than they absolutely have to. Inventory on the shelf is just cash waiting to be thrown in the trash, right? So this is more than just we're out of turkeys. This is, by the way, they're 33% more expensive than they used to be. And that is something that should keep all of us a little bit concerned, because it's not, like I said, just about the shortage itself. It's about the affordability and the fact that these things that we've grown accustomed to having easy access to are slowly getting further and further away from our grasp in the sense of financial resources. So I find that to be a problem, and I think you do too. Now, let's see here. Taking a little gander here at the chat. Dragon Lady, local grocery stores here give a free turkey if you spend $700 from October 15th through Thanksgiving. It's a nice way to do it. Now, $700 is a lot of money, or at least it used to be, right? But nowadays, I mean, $700 at the grocery store is just like 2 large trips, right? I can fill a cart and easily spend $350, depending on what I put in the cart. And it used to be I could fill a cart for like $190. So I think we all know that that is actually being a relatively reasonable number to hit within that amount of time. I don't know for sure if what you were saying is that had to be in a single trip, which I doubt, because that would be pretty unreasonable, and promoting something like that would just look ludicrous basically to the average person. But I assume you're saying spending $700 over that amount of time you receive a turkey, which should be easy to do, because every time I go to the grocery store, it's $100, even if I just wanted to get a dozen eggs, right? Now, speaking of eggs, that poultry shortage is applicable to eggs as well. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but my eggs are like $4 a dozen now. And I will tell you right now, 2 years ago, I was buying eggs for $1.68 a dozen, and now they're $4. So the inflation numbers aren't always applied correctly to every particular item. But some of the things that are very important are much more expensive than they used to be. And things that don't matter might have maintained a similar price. And those things that don't matter are now what's keeping that inflation number lower than it really is, saying, well, you know, this caviar costs the same as it always has. So since caviar hasn't gone up in price, well, let's not even worry about the fact that eggs are 130% more expensive than they used to be, right? So yeah, John P says eggs are stupid expensive. Exactly. Oki Khan, good to see you. Northern Girl Hobbies, thank you for being here and modding tonight. Exile Reviews, thank you for being here and modding tonight as well. It's always appreciated. And obviously, things are just getting difficult out there. And that's why we're having these conversations. Every Monday we get together and we need to review the week, as well as, you know, what we should expect coming at us ahead. And this is my expectation, is that these shortages are getting worse. And the fact that we're reporting on some of the same exact shortages as from 2 years ago should tell you that we have not found the solution, and we have not put any processes into place to try to overcome some of these demand and supply issues, which are now pushing us to the brink of probably just shut down for some of these industries, because a lot of companies are just closing up shop because it's just not worth it anymore. And if a company shuts down that provides something that we are already in short supply of, then we're going to have even less of that supply. So just always keep that in mind, because companies are having to make those decisions at this point in time, right? I mean, we all see what's happening with retailers. When you have Rite Aid and Starbucks and some of these major companies pulling stores out of major cities because of crime and the fact that they can no longer afford to operate there. Well, every time one of those stores closes, that's one less outlet for a major distributor to send product to, which means that distributor then has to cut the amount of product they're ordering, which means that the manufacturer is now having to either sit on product or reduce the amount that they produce. So it just kind of all snowballs together, correct? Now, one thing we don't have any shortage of, because I wanted to, you know, bring some positivity to this conversation. I think that's just so important. We don't have a shortage of really stupid gun control laws. So Oregon recently passed Measure 114 during the midterm cycle. And oh yeah, it's just so lovely. Now, a lot of this is already dead on arrival, thanks to some of the recent Supreme Court decisions regarding Bruin. However, these are things you need to keep in mind that they're still trying to do, even though Supreme Court decisions have been made, which would nullify a lot of these rules. And the other thing to keep in mind is that, yes, this was produced before the Bruin decision. So, of course, they weren't aware that that was going to be an issue. But at the same time, it didn't stop them from wanting to pursue these types of control measures. And this is one of the reasons why we have to consider this stuff. So, backers of Oregon's gun control measure 114 declared a major victory this week, but uncertainty lies ahead with months of legal wrangling and rulemaking likely to delay the start well into next year, if ever, right? Because they have a lot of issues. But the big issues they're having is, like, one, they're trying to do a 10-round magazine limit, which is just dumb, because no matter what, it doesn't stop anything from happening. It doesn't affect anyone. And everybody who has guns in the state is going to get all the 30 rounders and 21 rounders and 17 rounders and 15 rounders and all the magazines they can get, which means you guys should probably be aware of these magazines being harder to come by in the relative future here. But at the same time, I'll tell you what, from living in California, I can tell you firsthand that most people still somehow ended up with plenty of full capacity magazines at their disposal at just about any point in time. So these laws don't work and don't matter, but here they are to try to criminalize people like you and I. The other thing to keep in mind is that this implements rules that can't even go into fruition yet. They're trying to get everybody to have basically a permit to say they can own a firearm, where they would have to get training, and that training would have to be signed off on by individual sheriff's departments. Well, guess what? The sheriff's department said they, A, don't have the infrastructure to put all this together, and B, they also can't afford it. So no sheriff department in Oregon right now is set up to actually be able to do this, and yet it's going to be a requirement for you as a legal gun owner to go through this process in order to acquire firearms. So all of this is a mess. None of it will work. And at the same time, they just love it, and they're going to pat themselves on the back for it. And yet Oregon, funny enough, is half the state's trying to join Idaho, or greater Idaho, in order to avoid some of this BS. And at the same time, the people who voted for this all live in the same parts of Oregon where you see the most street level violence regarding certain groups that are of a certain political ideology. So this is where it's at. So our supply chain's falling apart. We don't have what we need. Life is getting more and more dangerous every single day. But congratulations, Oregon. You're trying to follow the California route. And obviously, what a shining example of what you would want your state to eventually turn into, because what could go wrong, right? So that's just something I wanted to mention. No shortage of dumb political concepts. At least we don't have any shortage there. Let's see here. James Moore II, a wise man once said, "You don't have to be a good shot. You just need plenty of bullets." Well, there might be some truth to that, but it helps to be both, right? And that's why as preppers, we not only load up on ammo when we can, but we also get training and we learn how to use our equipment. So let's see here. Naughty Heathen says, "You don't think railway workers will strike and hold the rest of the nation hostage, do you?" Well, here's the thing. What a great piece of leverage, right? So right now, threatening strike is a very good technique, let's just say, because they hold all the power. Well, if you guys don't do what we say, we'll just stop working, and then you don't have anything, do you? And you'll lose billions of dollars a day, won't you? Right? So it is good leverage. However, there is a point, and understand that this is just how life works, but there is a point where people, as a company, as a government, as an authoritarian control system, you have to just say, well, if that's how you want to do it, that's what you're going to do, I guess, right? Because at a certain point, a company or the government or whoever it is doesn't want the people to think they actually have that much power. So you have to be concerned about that, because if they try to push that leverage too far, at some point in time, they might say, well, just do it then. Right. And we've seen that happen with companies where employees will say, well, if you don't do this, I'm going to walk out right now. And companies say, okay, goodbye. Right. And unfortunately, most of the time, the companies are wrong for that. But, everyone wants to keep their ego and their pride up, and they don't want to be bullied by people they consider to be inferior to them. Now, do they? Interesting. It's like, why would you want people who are inferior than you to have the power to actually implement their opinion against you, especially if they have the equipment to be able to do so? I don't know. It's just a theoretical question. Right now, let's go ahead and get into some other interesting topics here. And somebody just brought up Risky Krisky, and I just want you to know that I enjoy his fashion. So moving on from there, let's go to A shortage. Oh, wait, one that we already knew about that's been happening for almost 2 years now. Well, yeah, but I mean, let's talk about it again because we can't fix these problems. And this is something that you need to be aware of, okay? A series of unfortunate events plague automotives, but a silver lining is visible. November 18th, 2022. Wait a second, this isn't from 2 years ago? Oh, no, but I'm pretty sure I saw the same exact headline. Yeah, you did. Okay. Understand, automakers see nothing short of horrible for next 3 to 5 years. The hope of a late 2022 recovery from the chip shortage for automakers has been officially and unfortunately stamped out. So back in 2020, when the chip shortage first began and was very, let's just say, hostile in the sense of like how freaked out everybody was about it. Everyone said, this is a problem, but we will get it fixed, right? And they all kept projecting, saying, by 2022, this really shouldn't be a problem. We'll get caught up. We'll open additional manufacturing. And I guarantee you guys, and I'm not I told you so type of guy, but we discussed here, I believe, straight up on a Marauder Monday that, they are not going to be able to get this done because it takes so long to implement additional manufacturing plants and to get people trained and to get people hired and to get everything you need, including the resources, which we have a shortage of, aka the silicone that China has a stranglehold on. All the stuff you need to produce chips is hard to get, and then producing them themselves is hard to do. And yet everyone thought, well, we could just do it by 2022. And here we are with an article that literally tells you, oh, that whole thing we thought we had hope for is just not going to happen. Sorry, right? And so understand that like this thing is going to take a long time to recover from. This is not like a oops, kind of a situation that you just bounce right back from. This is not something easily fixed, okay? Let's just read one part of this article to give you an idea of where we are. Ford is currently struggling with unfinished vehicle stock with over 40,000 unfinished cars stagnating in lots waiting for semiconductors to be installed. Ford is confident that these cars will be out of their lots by the end of the year. But Ford CFO John Lawler doesn't see any significant relief coming in 2023. So all of next year, there's no significant relief on its way. And yet 2 years ago, they were saying by 2022, we should be good to go. Keep all this in mind because they're going to keep telling us things as like it's going to be good to go. We're going to be fine. They're going to give us a euphemistic outlook as to all of this stuff. And then we're going to find out 2 years from now, like, oh, we were wrong. Sorry. Right. And that's exactly what we need to be watching out for. Now, another thing to keep in mind. And of course, we have the Defense Production Act to help us with some of this in case it ever becomes an issue. But if 40,000 Ford vehicles are lying stagnant on their lot right now, just waiting on semiconductor chips, right? Everything else is good to go, but they don't have any microchips. How impactful would this be on our military if we needed to mass produce additional equipment all of a sudden? And remember, in World War II, we didn't just have everything we needed to begin with. We had to continually produce, and all the women had to go and get jobs in factories, and all the households had to donate metal and aluminum, and you had to go recycle just about everything you could think of because we were in that short a supply of materials and workers. And that's how badly we needed to supplement the war front. And here we are, not even able to finish 40,000 Ford vehicles in the private sector. Imagine if the government tries to take over and say, well, we need all the semiconductors now. Well, fine, but where are they, right? So this is just something you got to keep in mind. And that shortage has not gone anywhere. And in fact, has not improved. It's gotten worse. And now they're telling us it won't even get better in 2023. Whereas 2 years ago, they said it'll be better in 2022. So understand the severity of some of these things. You understand that like these aren't going to just go away. I did miss a super chat earlier. Law of the minimum. If crisis is also an opportunity to thrive, create wealth, and so on, how can we preppers come at it from an abundance perspective instead of lack? Well, and that's the key issue. The problem is that whenever you deal with, let's just say, trying to capitalize on a hostile environment in the sense of, financial situations, right? You have to be able to project what the future outlook is going to look like. And then you have to find yourself able to sustain those investments while still maintaining your quality of life and holding on to those investments through the difficult times in order to reach the prosperous end. And that can be very difficult because right now you could say, well, for example, Magic the Gathering, right? Hasbro stock is in the tank because they don't listen to their consumers and they've done really bad things when it comes to taking care of their product, right? Well, right now would probably be a time to buy that type of stock. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not telling you to do this. Please don't do this and then say Magic Prepper told me to. All I'm saying is they're down in the tank. They're down in the toilet when it comes to their prices. So if I was going to invest in Hasbro stock, now would be a better time than other times before, right? The problem is that I'd have to be able to willingly set aside money that I can't necessarily afford to set aside. I'd have to then assume that stock is probably going to dip down even further in price at some point and make me lose money in the process. And then I would have to hold on to that investment for long enough to where that stock was able to rebound and then finally pay me out in a large enough sum to make all that time wasted worth it. So understand that that's the hardest part of this whole debacle is most people don't have the resources just to like hang on tight. So in many ways, earning more money is a good thing, but you have to do it in a way that makes sense, that doesn't tie you up throughout the process. I hope that makes sense. Like I said, not financial advice, but this is a difficult time to find some of those niches in, okay? Whatever tube. MP, I'm currently dealing with an ex that is starting drama and custody nonsense, false allegations. It's not working, but in the meantime, I try to stock up and prep. Give me a rant on how social parasites that live off the system won't last after SHTF. All right, well, listen. I'm not going to necessarily give you a rant on that, but what I'm going to say is obviously you have two sides of that coin, okay? And I'm trying to be as open-minded as I can and logical about what it is you're asking about right now. But understand that you have one side of people who completely rely on social programs and everything else that have zero concept of self-preservation and self-reliance if we find ourselves in an emergency. And their best chance of survival is that the government actually has their best interests at heart, takes them to a FEMA camp, and puts them up for the long term until things settle down, then takes them back out into a safe environment, right? That's their best hope. So understand, for some people that's plenty, because you know what? If it's not going to work out in that regard, they don't want to do it anyway. But the other thing you have to consider, and this is just something for you to really think about, but the other thing to keep in mind is that some of these people who prosper off of social programs and everything else are just taking advantage of a system that already existed anyway, and they're using it to their advantage in order to push themselves forward in front of other people who aren't willing to use those programs or aren't willing to play the game, as some people would say. So those people who are doing it in a crafty way and learning how to work the system and using it to their advantage might actually have some decent survival skills because they understand how to map out the overall situation and bend whatever it is that they can see to their advantage in order to come out on top as best they can. So keep in mind that there's always two sides to the coin and that there's two different perspectives you can look at that situation from. And for some people, and sometimes myself included, when we're talking about taxes, and I'm not going to call them, your tax refund because it was your money to begin with. But what I'll say is if we've paid into the system, make sure you get what you need from the system in the times that you need it. And don't have too much pride to say, well, I'm not going to do that. Okay, well, you've been paying taxes for how long and you're not willing to receive some of the benefits of what you paid for? These are just things to keep in mind. Now, moving on from there, because there's a lot going on. But you remember that other shortage a couple of years ago? I put out a video that did really well, actually. And it was called, here's another shortage. I believe it was called like another shortage you don't know about, right? Because it was low key at the time. But it was about carbon dioxide. It was about a CO2 shortage. And that's actually a big deal when it comes to industry in general because it's used in so many processes. But this is November 14th, 2022. CO2 shortage hits the beer world. According to experts, the craft beer and brewing industry is being hit by a shortage of CO2. Just how did this happen? And is this a long-term problem? Well, I don't know. Is it long-term if it's been happening for 2 years now? But if you read this article, you would almost think that it just started, right? Okay. When gazing upon a lovely pour of terrific beer, what elements are most important? A lovely color, certainly. A terrific aroma and flavor profile, well, obviously. And those lovely little bubbles due to carbonation, right? I don't know if that's the priority of order that you would use describing beer, but that's how this article went. But there's another CO2 shortage going on. There are a number of factors putting pressure on the supply of carbon dioxide and causing prices to spike. CO2 is produced as a byproduct of processes such as ethanol and ammonia production, and many of these facilities are going through scheduled maintenance this fall, limiting their output of CO2. oh, scheduled maintenance, where we knew we were going to have to do this, and yet we weren't able to stock up on supply ahead of time in order to meet demand. Generally, that's how companies would approach these situations. But nowadays, you can't actually shut down for scheduled maintenance without creating a shortage, because at this point in time, there is no surplus, right? So understand that this is a problem. Oh, and in terms of threat to the industry, I do not foresee the shortage being a long-term issue. Interesting that this is the sentiment here, considering the fact that, like I said, we've had this happening for 2 years at this point. Okay, so just to demonstrate here, and I'm not trying to, be one of those guys, but give me 1 second here. I'm going to pull something up, because sometimes we can do it live. You know what I'm saying? And I think you guys are on board with that most of the time anyway, right? And just trying to, hey, and if you guys want to see like Fat Magic Prepper, I can share this little screen here with you, okay? But let's see here. We've got, sorry, I can self-deprecate once in a while, okay? So right here, another shortage you don't know about, inside information that's concerning, because I had a friend within the industry telling me about how the CO2 shortage was going to affect us. And yeah, I wore a larger bra back then. It's not a big deal. But like I said, 87,000 views. It was a decent video, and this was 2 years ago, okay? Oh, and then I clicked on it. So here we go. And check out the hair. Yes, it's still white right there in the front, like it always has been. But, the haters will just say I'm really good at upkeep. So it is what it is. But what I'm trying to say is that the CO2 shortage is a big deal, and it's been happening since then. Since then. And also this 450 Bushmaster upper you see right here. Yeah, that was a fun little trick pony. Let's just call it that. Anyway, these aren't new shortages, but they're being reported on as if they are. They're just getting worse. So the baseline that was set before 2020 was here. And they said, look, we're having some shortages, right? So the shortages drop below the baseline. Now the baseline is back here where the shortages are. And now we're reporting on shortages again, which are now down here. See how this works? It's because none of this has actually been resolved. So now when we're talking shortages, it's because we even have less than what we're already working with. And that's why this is getting worse. It's not because the supply lines are necessarily falling apart. In fact, a lot of the port congestion has been remedied, not fully resolved either, but remedied, right? And at the end of the day, we still don't have everything we need. So these are just things that you have to keep in mind. Your CO2 cartridges, Philip Albert, not a bad idea to have those. They definitely have some good utility. But just to let everybody know, CO2 is used in food production, right? It's used in a lot of processes that are very necessary for our food supply. So the CO2 shortage will make food more expensive, as well as carbonated beverages more expensive, and all ends up being intertwined. And that's one of the big deals we have to keep an eye out here for. Now, I do want to, and I just want to say, whatever tube, hopefully my answer was understood by you. I wasn't trying to say that what you were saying wasn't correct. What I was trying to say is that there's two ways to look at that, and I wanted to make sure that we covered both of those. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that I will tell you that YouTube, okay, and this is just like, hey, YouTube info, right? Not that big of a deal to you guys probably, but I'll let you know that YouTube goes through these weird peaks and valleys when it comes to like overall performance. And I figured I would go ahead. Hey, Rusty, glad you could catch a live one. That's cool. I figured I would go ahead because sometimes it's just fun to do things. But I want to start a quick poll for everybody. And I want you guys to let me know, because I actually want some honest opinions here as well. YouTube goes through peaks and valleys of performance for channels. I've experienced it over the last few years, right? But I will say that this past month has been extraordinarily bad in the sense of performance. And I need to know, do you guys think that it's because of the midterms and they were maybe shifting viewership towards more friendly environments? Do you think that it's because I have been putting out lesser quality content for everybody? Do you think that there is a shift in what people are being exposed to? I would like to know your input. So I'm just going to go ahead and type this out real quick. And I try to keep talking while I do this, because I don't want to bore everybody who's watching this post live, because that would just be unfortunate for them as well. And I want everybody to know that I actually value everybody's opinion. I'm not going to lie. Oh, it doesn't like that one? Come on, man. You can do it. And let's see. There. I'm going to give you guys 3 options. And maybe I don't have all of them here. But I'm interested to see what your thoughts are, because this is important, okay? Let's see here. Some people said some things that I wanted to read that I can't read. So Hobbs didn't like my brag videos about my SIG MCX or my video about pistol braces, blah, blah, blah. Well, first off, Hobbs, just so you know, that was just for informational reasons to let everybody know how stupid it was. It wasn't like a, hey, you should comply with this. That's not the point. And then the MCX thing is like, well, I'm going to show you guys the stuff I have when I find it applicable to what's going on. So if you consider that bragging, it's a YouTube channel. So I'm going to share stuff that I have and own and have experience with that I can share information about. Bragging comes from a perspective of usually envy, right? So if you consider it bragging, it's because you don't have something you might want or can't afford, which is understandable. But from someone else's perspective, me showing a Gen 1 Legacy MCX that I bought used would make me a poor. So it all comes from perspective. And I'm just throwing that out there for you. I'm not mad at you or anything. I just wanted you to kind of get my thought process on that, because I was told I was a braggart back when I was showing stock Glock 17s with factory sights and Bear Creek Arsenal 300 blackout builds. And people were saying, well, stop bragging about all the stuff you have. It's rude. And so I don't even know what to say about that anymore. It just is what it is, right? People come to YouTube to look things up and to check stuff out. I don't know what to tell you. Okay. Now, anyway, so I appreciate it, Hobbs. I do. Like I said, I take criticism well, but I also usually will give you something else to consider. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just letting you know. I just want everybody to give me, your thoughts, because it is important. And there's these weird peaks and valleys, but this valley is a pretty drastic one right now. And I'm sure it'll kick back into gear when it needs to. But man, it's just it's one of those things where it's like there always feels to be like a secondary reasoning behind some of this stuff. Now, I'm trying my best to Hobbs, you're tired of the gun tubers like Demolition Rack and Kentucky Ballistics. No, I get that, because it's got a weird like frat guy bro kind of feel to it, which I get, and they do really well, and I have nothing against those guys. But I do understand that the level of information has like been pulled down quite a bit, and it's just pure entertainment at this point. Whereas like I prefer like a Paul Harrell video where like I almost fall asleep, but I leave with a lot of really good info, All right, so let's see here. Now, let's get into some other stuff that's happening right now. This is going to actually concern some of you, especially in the rural environment, okay? So I want anybody who's worried about like the city folk entering their environment to keep this in mind, okay? Because that is a concern that people have. Now, I don't think it's necessarily a huge big deal, because the people who can afford to get out of the city are usually going to have at least some level of let's just say credibility, I guess. But at the end of the day, they might bring their crappy politics with them. So keep that in mind. But, and when I say crappy politics, I don't mean, left or right. I'm trying to say the people who think it's reasonable to tax you extra so that they can, build a tennis racket court at the frickin' community center or whatever. Anyway, I'm just ranting on that, I guess. California to build more housing faster. Now, this came out in September. Now, here's something I want you to keep in mind. There is a housing shortage that's still going on. We all know that the evictions were all happening back in the day, and we all know a lot of things were occurring. Well, this housing shortage is a big deal, right? And so San Francisco, building on California's historic efforts to tackle the housing crisis, Governor Gavin Newsom signed legislation to streamline the housing approval process in California, create thousands of good-paying jobs, blah, 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 blah. Okay, here's the thing, okay? They are trying to figure out how to get people homes and how to deal with this housing shortage. But their approach might not, might not enthuse you, okay? Because this is like I guess you would say like the official story, let's just say. Now let's talk about what's being put out there. Now this information was hidden behind a subscription wall. And I found the article on multiple sites and all of them required a paid subscription, which I refused to do. So luckily I have a very fast screenshot finger. Is that I didn't like that. I'm not going to say that again. Anyway, I was able to capture a screenshot of the meat and potatoes of the article before it flashed the paywall up in front of me, right? So let's go ahead and let me show you this. And this article just came out this week. Okay, now this is an opinion piece, but you can understand that it comes from the thought process of people who are in this area right now. And it's kind of small for you guys. So here, I'll read it, or at least the parts that matter, okay? Many Southern California cities are struggling to implement state mandates to increase housing production. Yet while the state needs more housing, it is politically challenging to squeeze more units into fully built-out cities whose residents are accustomed to single-family homes. To thread the needle, government should encourage new dense developments in unincorporated areas. As the Register reported last month, most Southern California cities missed a deadline to secure state approval for new, more permissive zoning plans. Last year, Huntington Beach lost a court battle against state housing mandates after incurring millions of dollars of litigation costs. Okay. Now, basically what they're trying to say is that they want to build dense communities in unincorporated areas that are relatively far from rail lines and workplaces. But such communities may be attractive to the growing ranks of remote workers and retirees around the state. Okay. Now, here's where they get the leverage, or I guess the data, to try to prove their point. But with the rise of remote work, it may be possible to create dense, walkable communities relatively far from existing downtowns or rail lines. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many employees started working from rural areas in such Zoom towns as Bozeman, Montana, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Truckee, California, and New York's Hudson Valley. If they can work productively from such a far-flung location, employees could also work in rural portions of suburban counties. Okay, so understand that, and like I said, that article is behind a paywall. So, I struggled to get this for you, but this is the plan. Now that everyone can work remotely, right? They're going to move them out to the country, okay? Because they don't have enough housing. There's a shortage. So how will they incentivize people that generally like to be in the city and want to live within those types of environments, especially when you talk about ideological reasons for staying within a city? Well, they're going to incentivize them financially, of course. So what they're basically saying is they want to build large multi-unit structures out in unincorporated areas and then shove all these remote workers into those places and build them up as nice little walk-around communities where they have their coffee shop and they have their hipster bar and they have all the things they need in order to feel like they're at home, but then they can go to work from their little keyboard at the wireless center at the cafe or whatever and still get their job done. So understand that that's their plan. That's what they want to do. Now, if you don't think there's an underlying theme there of moving voter blocks into areas that are generally voting a certain way, then you're not as cynical as I am, apparently. But keep in mind that this is not just for that reason, in my opinion. This would be a great way to spread some of those voters into areas that are problematic, right? So all of those things are on the table. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised to see some of that start happening. And don't forget, they literally started mentioning places that a lot of you all probably live in order to escape some of the city life struggles, aka like Truckee, California is pretty close to where I used to live out in the country. You have Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which is too expensive for someone like myself. But, parts of Wyoming are more affordable near that area. And then, of course, like Hudson Valley, New York, right? Like we all know Hudson Valley prepping and survival, right? Well, here we are. So this is what the plan is. And I just want everyone here to know that that's going to be on the docket at some point in time. And I wouldn't be surprised if you guys figured out that your neighbors moving into those giant complexes that they're starting to put together aren't exactly there to be part of the community, right? They want to have their own little community that they can walk to everything from and have a bicycle and whatnot, right? They don't want to move out to the country and get a 4x4. That's ridiculous. That's terrible for the environment and not economical. So bike lanes and bike paths. That's all I have to say. If you've lived in the country long enough and haven't had that come up at some point in time, then maybe you haven't lived in the country long enough. I don't know. All right. Now, Um, look at that. So BR says they are building a lot of multiple family complexes in every nook and cranny in the suburbs. Exactly. But those are running out of space too. So what they're trying to say is they're going to move them out even further than there. And then they're going to create little spots for them where they don't even have to leave. Okay. All right. And I'm not anti-city people. Don't get me wrong. I've lived in urban environments. I used to live pretty close to Sacramento, California for quite some time. I used to live in the East Bay of California. I used to work there. I'm not like, oh, city people are the worst, because you could probably consider me a city person if you wanted to. I never lived in like a flat in the middle of downtown anywhere, but I'm just saying that, I grew up in the suburbs of Florida, and then I moved into a very urbanized environment of California, and now I live in a very rural environment in North Dakota. But if the right people come out to the rural environments, maybe that's okay. And so far, I think the friends that I've made out here in rural North Dakota have been pretty accepting of me being who I am versus trying to be upset about me being their new neighbor, except for maybe the guys who, live close enough to hear me shooting way too often lately. I got a suppressor. I'm trying, All right. Now, let's talk about another shortage that's still going on. I'm trying to bring all this stuff to you guys' attention because it's ridiculous to me. But the idea that all this was going to be resolved within a year or two was very naive. Here we are. Oh, wait, baby formula shortage is still a problem in the U.S. It's still a problem? What do you mean? I thought we could put in some emergency orders and use the Defense Production Act and get everything rolling when it comes to making sure our babies have what they need. No, can't do that. I mean, we can do a lot of other dumb stuff, but we can't necessarily get formula to babies that need it. And don't start in the chat of they don't need formula and this and that. Look, everybody's situation is different. So stop applying or projecting your situation onto other people that might have difficulties and challenges that you're not associated with or aware of. Okay, it's just a good habit to make when it comes to placing judgment before you have the full amount of facts, right? But what I'm trying to say is, get out of here, newsy. I don't want to join you. Okay. Though it's easier to get now, families are still finding empty shelves when searching grocery stores for baby formula. November 10th. This is recent, okay? The baby formula shortage is still creating challenges for families across the country, okay? In some regions of the country, parents in search of baby formula in their local stores are still finding empty shelves, and not every brand has been able to get back up to 100% just yet, which can have huge consequences for parents who rely on specific formulas to keep their babies healthy, aka the baby has some type of allergy or something and they need a specific formula. Now, all this stuff, we could go into this whole formula shortage and the reasons behind everything. The big takeaway here is that this is still a problem. And if you want to talk about a shortage that should have been resolved as quickly as possible, you would assume it'd be one that made sure the babies in this country, the children were taken care of probably before anybody else. But then again, the way this country views children and everything else happening these days when it comes to everything involving children and babies, I guess maybe that's a questionable statement nowadays. I would have assumed that, just me being me, and most people being, average Americans, I would say, but maybe that's just not the case anymore. But what I'm trying to say is that Van City Prepper says kids meds in Canada, very bad. Yes, and that's the problem. And we talked about the amoxicillin shortage here on this channel. But like I said, my kids had to get prescribed azithromycin, which I was not saying was worse than amoxicillin, which I got chastised for quite a bit in the comments. What I was trying to say by that is that it's not the medicine they were prescribed. So we are at a point where we are getting other medicine than what was prescribed because of a shortage, not knocking azithromycin as being not capable of doing the job. That was not what I was trying to say. So just throwing that out there, okay? Now, Yardbirds, yeah, no CO2 for the booze and no milk for the baby. So, and that's where we are. Now, let's go ahead and talk about an interesting point. Let's talk about probably one of the more interesting shortages that's been going on for quite some time. And I want to talk about it because I think it applies heavily to our preparedness and our ability to avoid a major SHTF scenario here in the United States. People underestimate how SHTF might look, okay? Is there a chance that we could see a foreign invasion one day? I'm going to say yes. A lot of people will say, nope, no chance, will never happen, right? I don't know why you would close your mind off to that possibility. It's better just to say it's possible and possibly prepare for it or have some idea surrounding it rather than saying it's completely impossible. But I will say that SHTF can also look like the degradation of a country to the point where you no longer recognize it, right? And if one day you wake up and it feels like you're living in, I don't know, like Tijuana, well, that might be SHTF, where every day is more dangerous than the next. And you never know if you're going to have a normal day trying to make a living or if you're going to be robbed of all your valuable possessions, right? So let's just talk about what's happening in the world that leads me to that point, okay? So first and foremost, we have 2.1 million manufacturing jobs could go unfulfilled by 2030, okay? Now, this is from May 4th, but this all ties, 2021, by the way. But this all ties in. So I just want to bring this to your attention once again to kind of bring this front and center, okay? Understand that no one is taking jobs in manufacturing sector. People are, don't get me wrong, but not in the numbers that are required to maintain the level of manufacturing that we need in order to maintain our supply level, okay? So because of that, we're having a hard time even just producing the things that we need. And they're saying by 2030, we're going to have 2.1 million jobs go unfilled because people just aren't signing up for that type of work. And at the same time, people just don't want to work in general. So this is a big deal. Now, why does this matter for right this second? Well, understand that without manufacturing in the United States, it's going to be outsourced somewhere. And with those 2.1 million jobs going unfulfilled by 2030, where do you think most of manufacturing is going to be? Overseas. So that puts us in a difficult scenario where we're still relying on other countries for the bulk of our necessities, okay? Now, what else is in the works for the labor shortage? Well, I think we could have all seen this coming. But the California Sheriff's Office discontinues daytime patrols due to catastrophic staffing shortage, right? The suspension will take effect November 20th as the agency continues to experience barriers to recruitment and retention. Tehama County, California. One California Sheriff's Office reportedly is suspending daytime patrol services due to a catastrophic staffing shortage. Now, I think we all know why police departments and sheriff's departments around the country are experiencing staffing shortages. They've been demonized for years at this point in time. The job has become more and more dangerous. The pay hasn't caught up with inflation. The allure of law enforcement is no longer there because the appreciation from the community doesn't exist the same way as it used to. And at the same time, I mean, in all honesty, it's just a roll of the dice, right? I mean, we hear stories every single day about a standard traffic stop turning into a fatality, right? So all these things are happening. And don't forget that all it takes is one mistake as an officer to literally lose your life. It doesn't mean you necessarily die, but you can end up in court, get sued, get dragged through the mud on public media, national media, and not be able to have that career any longer, all because you made one singular mistake, regardless of how your career looked beforehand. So there's a lot of reasons why people aren't necessarily signing up to be police, and I understand them completely. But what I'm trying to say is that this is also how things start to fall apart. Now, I don't need police in my life very often. Have I ever had to call the police? Yeah, but are there times where I should have probably called the police when I didn't? Yeah, but what I will say is that I try to operate under the impression that I'll do what I can to not need them. And I think all of you probably operate in much the same way. But there is something to be said about having a level of law and order within a community that has a necessity to it, or else you end up with some form of anarchy or mob rule. And both of those can be extremely dangerous as well. And unfortunately, as these police departments and sheriff's departments become more and more short-staffed and more degraded, the less control or the less policing there will be when it comes to the criminal element within our communities, which means they can thrive and eventually become too powerful for anyone else to stop. And it's not always about, hey, well, I'm a regular dude and I don't need cops in my business all the time. No, I get that. But you have to understand that without the cops, it allows cartels and gangs and everybody else to just operate freely, which then allows them to seep into every portion of your community, aka dealing drugs, committing crimes, entering into things like your city council and things of that nature in order to change the rules of the game for their benefit. And eventually you find yourself in a third world country without even realizing it. So understand that police are a necessary some might say evil in many ways, because you need some level of law and order, or else you will have the opposite. And because of that, we're on our way to experiencing what that's like more and more. And that's what we're seeing in many of these cities already. Now, I know that in my area, the police departments are always hiring. They always need more people, and they can't hire enough people to keep up. And the police that are working are overworked and work too many hours, which then will open the doors to more mistakes or accidents or who knows what else, because of being exhausted, being stressed, and being overworked. So there's a lot of issues that comes from this, but this is where one of the labor shortages has taken us. And it's just an example as to how it can affect us directly. Not just, hey, I can't get my tacos at Taco Bell the same way as I used to. Now it's like, hey, my community is not as safe as it used to be because of X, Y, and Z, right? Well, there's even bigger picture stuff when it comes to that than what you would think. And I'm not trying to say that it's, without police, we're all screwed, because like many communities could probably handle it without them, right? Because I think like here in my town, we appreciate our police department because we're a small town. We know the police, we see them, we interact with them, and we understand what their main objective is here. When you live in a major city, it's hard to understand what your police department's major objective is. And the larger a police department, the more likely corruption and bad cops become a reality, right? So those are things to keep in mind. However, what about the military? Because we need that too. Well, the military is facing extreme shortages. Now, here's where the solutions need to be considered as problematic, okay? And this is what I'm going to do. Mark Fallis, thank you so much. Always supporting the channel, and I appreciate it. And I just want you guys to know that we are on our way to some interesting times. And this is going to be a weird one for you to consider, okay? But if things don't happen suddenly, things will get worse than they might have gotten. I hope that makes sense. And I don't know if all of you catch my drift there. But if we don't have a sudden correction, or even a sudden, let's just say, fault, right? Then we're going to have a slow downgrade. And that's maybe worse, because at least in a sudden situation, a solution has to be presented sooner than later. With a slow downgrade, we're going to find ourselves just one day waking up and going, oh crap, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, check it out. U.S. military recruitment numbers are in the trash. They're doing really bad with recruitment, okay? U.S. military would be stronger with more immigrants. All right, now, wait. Here's what you need to think about when it comes to this, okay? This is nothing about immigrants themselves, okay? In fact, I would say if someone immigrates here and then joins the military and has every thought in their mind to becoming a naturalized U.S. citizen and doing what they can to uphold the values of the United States of America to the best of their ability, I say that's a win for everyone, right? However, there's more to this than you might think, okay? Immigrants have served in the U.S. Armed Forces since the nation's founding, fighting in every major conflict in American history. Hundreds of thousands of immigrants have sacrificed their lives defending America during the Civil War, including both world wars and conflicts such as Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. That is true, okay? Now, do we have enough immigrants in the military? I don't know why that would matter. That's not really the point, right? But why is immigrant enlistment in the U.S. military put into perspective? Well, here's the thing. We have issues getting those people in because naturalization has become issues, and now we have weird status things that are problematic and everything else. But at the end of the day, the point of this article is to just say that we can deal with some of our personnel shortages if our leadership is willing to act and allow immigration to be the solution to our military's problems of not being able to recruit enough people, right? So at the end of the day, this is like a solution, which I understand. And this is also something that already occurs. So this isn't like a big deal. But what I wanted to bring to your attention here, okay, I understand where all that comes from. But the concerns that you have to have when it comes to where we are now as a country and where we're heading and everything else related to that is that we already have a very unvetted immigration process down at the southern border. We also have a lot of infiltration within the country from select groups that tend to have very malicious intent. Now, understand that getting into the military and moving forward in the ranks to the point where you have access is a very valuable target for certain groups and certain entities in order to achieve the same way as they do through our political system and the same way as they would try to do through law enforcement, right? So, for example, if you were operating as a cartel and you had a DEA agent on your payroll, you might be able to get away with more because of the fact that you have that cover, right? So I want you to keep in mind the article we just reviewed and this data leak that recently came out in October, okay? And I just want everyone to remember that sometimes the solutions can bring their own problems with them as well. We shouldn't be too hasty about every single thing that we're trying to fix, especially when we start looking to outside sources in order to resolve these problems, okay? Okay. Here's what happened during a data leak that Mexico had from their military of 4 million documents of their closest kept secrets. We've learned a ton about the military. I mean, one of the big ones is that President Andres Manuel López Obrador had to be airlifted to a hospital with a heart problem. Another document alleges that a top law enforcement officer was taking $250,000 a month to protect the cartel. But above all, this has revealed a ton about Mexico's military. We've learned that despite being tasked with fighting the drug war, some of its soldiers sold weapons to the cartels. We've learned that the military suggests legislation, that the military keeps statistics on murders, and that they run surveillance on airports. We found that they keep dossiers on politicians and environmental activists, anarchists, and feminists. In one email, we found that what military officials call a counterintelligence operation against the bricklayers at a government project. There are millions of documents, as you said, but I think what is clear is that we find is Mexico's military is involved in every major aspect of this country. So understand that Mexico, in many ways, demonstrates what happens when you allow the wrong type of people to gain access to the right type of organization. Okay. And all I wanted to say in regards to that is that these shortages are going to continually push us towards solutions that could have major consequences. And these are things that you should keep in mind as well. Understand that if a chip shortage is the problem and manufacturing can't keep up, then they will find a solution, aka allowing China to be that number one producer of chips even over Taiwan, if that's what it requires in order to get what we need in order to keep moving forward in the sense of business, right? Shareholders need their dividends. The other thing to keep in mind is that if we find ourselves with a manufacturing employee shortage, right, a labor shortage in the manufacturing industry, well, those companies are going to turn to automation. And that automation is going to get back to where we needed supply to be in order to meet demand. However, that automation is going to have its own consequences, aka less jobs available to human beings. And eventually that automation will continually upgrade to the point where even rudimentary jobs won't be as necessary either. And then when people don't have jobs in order to afford the products that are being produced by this automation, well, how do you think they're going to produce or purchase those products? Because what's the point of producing them if the automation is too expensive and no one's buying it? So enter universal basic income. There's just so many consequences to all these solutions, and none of them have worked, right? So we just have to be raw food writer, Red Dawn poster in the background. Yeah, really. What's wrong with that? I'm trying to get your shtick on that one. But what I will say is that back in the day, Marauder Monday voted on what they wanted to put up in the background, and it was a Red Dawn poster. So that comes directly from the community, not just me trying to project my, classic movie love to the rest of the community. So just throwing that out there. But you can't be throwing shade at Red Dawn. I mean, where are you? What kind of party do you think you're at? All right. So I want you guys to keep in mind, I gave you that poll earlier. People, I was asking, where do you think this YouTube valley of underperformance came from, right? Because it's been a rough month in regards to that. 56% of you said midterms shifting attention, which might be the case because I try my best to avoid being too political on the channel, although it can be difficult from time to time. Lower quality content was 15%, and that might be true. And I always strive to do better. So maybe I'll just have to provide better content. So I'll see what I can do about that in order to help give you guys more value when I can, and maybe up the production level, although I'm still a one-man operation. Regardless of what everybody thinks, I cannot afford an assistant. I don't have, as Canadian Prepper says, a communist cameraman to help me make videos. It's literally just me and a tripod 99.9% of the time. And then prepping fatigue, I think that's a big one too. I think people are just kind of tired, or I don't know, maybe the prepping community on YouTube has done their job over the last 2 years and everybody got prepped. Maybe everybody's just prepared now, right? Like, well, got a year's worth of food. I've got plenty of power options. I've got my house fortified. I've got plenty of firearms and equipment for self-defense. I'm good now, right? So maybe that's where we're at. Maybe everybody got everything they need. Prepper Now says fatigue, and I totally get that. So, but yeah, I mean, I appreciate everybody's input because I do value it. And the feedback's important. And even the negative criticism, I guarantee you, is well taken because I might fight back sometimes because I do. Look, I come from one of my first jobs was as a cook, right? And if you've never been a line cook, I guarantee you don't have quite the level of trash talk as a line cook unless maybe you were like in the military. Because like I assume, since I was not in the military, that you guys have like trash talk figured out like to a T, especially with some of the verbiage that comes out of military guys. I'm like, that came out of trashing somebody, I guarantee it. But what I will say is, like, in a kitchen, it's hot, it sucks. Everybody hates what they're doing and hates everybody else. So the trash talk is like it's good stuff, you know. It's like, oh, so good. But what I will say is that you know, I try to take criticism well. And even if I argue with somebody in the comments, a lot of times it's either because they're just wrong or they aren't providing good feedback. They're just being a dick. And I don't know how else to say that, but it's true because there's a lot of that going on. I'm just saying, like, you know, tell me what I could do better. Don't just say, I hate your mouth, right? Because if you don't think I've been told that before, I have, literally. So, but I appreciate all of you guys. And it's been a great live stream tonight, but I think we're going to wrap it up. I hope you understand what I was trying to demonstrate tonight, just as a quick wrap up, is that these shortages are getting worse and they're still being reported on 2 years after the fact. So don't be surprised about other shortages that you heard about 2 years ago coming back around the news cycle, because it's not that they've improved and then gotten bad again. It's that, like I said, and this is like the big takeaway from tonight's conversation, if you guys take anything from it, 2020 supply, right? 2020 shortages, boom, okay? Oh, we have these shortages. They're right here. The supply used to be this, okay? Supply comes down to where shortages just are. Welcome to new normal, right? That's new normal, okay? And here we are in 2022. Hey, supply and now shortages, okay? Oh, shortages are down here again. Understand, these are not the same levels as these were. We're just being reported on the same thing again because it's gotten worse, not because it's happening again. All right. Now, Prepping Mantis, I appreciate you not being a dick. Law of the minimum. Maybe your feed. I assume you're saying my feed turned into poo-poo the last month. It changed, so I think the algo is different. And I will say this. You can actually see that happening. And I'll say this, and I want you guys to think about this, because there's a lot of weird happenings on like the background of YouTube that you guys might not realize. But this is good information to have just from like even a prepping perspective, because maybe it's a good way to gather intelligence. But that when you see on your homepage that every video is from like a creator you often watch, but the video is 3 years old or 2 years old or 5 years old, which has been happening to me lately. Usually it's because they're not trying to put things that are relevant to right now in front of you, or at least that's my thought process on it, right? And if that's the case, then you have to ask why. And like I said, one of the biggest, votes for the poll was midterms shifting attention. And maybe that's what was done over this last month, was like, hey, look at this. Hey, you remember this video from 4 years ago from survival prepping for normal people? Yeah, that was a good video, right? And I'm like, yeah, I like that guy's videos, but he doesn't make videos anymore. But that was a good video, but it was about something that happened in 2019. So um, I don't know what we're doing now, right? So just keep that in mind. I noticed that happen quite a bit. It seems to happen often, and that maybe that's just a data point to use, right? Let's see here, and then Benjamin Jams likes the fat magic prepper better. All right. Well, it is winter here, so you never know. It might bulk up a little bit. But what I will say is I have adjusted my diet. I've been eating a little bit more than I used to, but I'm working out just as hard and sometimes still harder. So maybe that those gains are starting to come back. You never know. But I got really skinny for a minute there. I was 186 pounds, and now I'm back around like 198. But what I will say is I don't want to get so thin that I'm not strong. Right. So I got to balance it out. But you guys are awesome. I appreciate it. And honestly, if there's anything else you need from me, you guys know where to go. I will say that there's a lot of cool things in the works, and I'm working on some cool new projects. I'll do what I can in order to make them as valuable for your time as I possibly can. I promise you. But I do appreciate all of your understanding, and thanks for the support, because at the end of the day, it means a lot more than you really could imagine. So thank you guys so much, and that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.